This year I read a lot of books. More than I have ever read in a single year. I read like 140 books this year or something. Last year I read 73. Well, this is going to be me ranking all 125 fiction books I read because a top 10 just doesn't quite do it. Like, why would I just give you the 8% or whatever top books I read for a year when I read this many? It just doesn't do it justice. So I'm going to tier rank every fiction book I read this year. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, you just like blew through the books or whatever. You just speed read them, all that, doing booktuber nonsense. Well, what actually happened was my brain started working this year. I've had sleep apnea undiagnosed, and while a CPAP made me want to step in front of a bus, so I quit using it, I have been doing all the other things I need to do to sleep better. So this year my brain worked, which is why I've read as many books as I did. Plus, I prioritized books over a lot of other hobbies that I normally do. So anyways, now that I have preemptively nipped in the bud the you didn't actually read these books, let's get right into this. The books are in chronological order of when I read them. That's why some series are going to be broken up and stuff like that. And the way I'm going to be ranking this is, as normal, S, A, B, C, and then D and F tier. So D and F tier is either I DNF'd the book or the book was so bad it should have been DNF'd. Now, the way I'm going to be ranking these is going to be not only based on how good they are on their own, but how they hold up against the other books in the ranking. I'm going to warn you, there's going to be a lot of S and A tier stuff because I read a lot of really good books this year. I went out of my way to find like the best stuff to read because why would I waste what little time I have on this earth seeking out turds that people have already told me were terrible? So I did find quite a few turds or very mid books, so they'll be on this list as well. Most of the stuff that's like okay is probably going to be C tier because B is basically going to be good but doesn't hold up to the rest of the stuff on the list. And as we go through, I'll just kind of share my thoughts on each book and we'll see where this goes. So strap in, we're about to rank 125 books. I started my list December 2023, like the middle of it, about the time that I'm filming this, which is December 20th, 2024. And I did that for a few reasons. One, this is going to be my new cutoff point for reading every year because the last week or two of December, I'm busy. I'm barely going to read anything. And also, I want to do stuff like this for my channel, so I might as well have like a cutoff date that gives me wiggle room to put something like this out at the end of December. The other reason was I started my Glen Cook project early in December because I could not wait. And so some of this stuff was the last 2 weeks of December 2023. Let's start ranking. First thing I read was The Best of Glen Cook. That is a solid C. The reason why is because it has some very interesting stuff in it. And at the beginning of each story, Glen Cook gives like a little tidbit of what inspired him to write it or some context. But the problem is this has 3 Black Company short stories in it that are awful. They're like the worst thing since Port of Shadows. They're not good at all. The other stories, very good to like okay, but those 3 stories tank this thing. If you didn't have those in here, I'd probably rate it way higher, which will be why you see something like Winter's Dreams later on that shares some short stories as this collection. The Best of Glen Cook is good, just skip the Black Company stuff. When I got it, it was free on Audible. It might still be free on Audible, so check that out. It's not a good way to start reading Glen Cook though, so maybe just for the Glen Cook enjoyers out there. Next we have A Shadow of All Night Falling. This is A tier. This is book 1 in the Dread Empire series by Glen Cook, and the reason it isn't S tier is because it's very confusing. I think that it might actually be S tier if you follow the reading order that I suggested by reading the 2 prequels first, because you're a lot more invested in the characters in this story. After that, we've got October's Baby, which is also A tier. The thing about, I'll go ahead and throw All Darkness Met up here too. The thing about the Dread Empire is like the books aren't, we're going to move Shadow of All Night Falling to B. The thing about these books is they should just be read in one big chunk because they end fine, but they're so short that, I thought about putting them up there as A Cruel Wind, which is an omnibus of them, and just considering it one book because they read like that, but wanted to pad my stats a little, and it's going to be different with other series where one book could tank the entire series, so making it like one chunk would have been to the detriment of like 2 of the books out of them. So that's why they're kept separate. But anyways, October's Babies is just really good. October's Baby, the the baby itself is terrifying. Like there's these crazy stuff in the Dread Empire. The thing about the Dread Empire is Glen Cook wanted to write huge, sprawling, epic fantasy where every single minute detail is like in his like lore Bible or whatever, and he did it, and it is a lot. They're very good, but it's also a lot. Granted, they're short books. Like all three of those are shorter than the shortest Stormlight Archive book. So I suggest you give them a chance. I will go further into Glen Cook stuff when I make my Glen Cook video. I'm reading the last book right now, so you're gonna get a tier ranking of everything Glen Cook's ever written, or at least like a reading guide under the guise of a tier ranking list. I'm not sure yet. Anyways, let's move on. Empire of Silence. This is a solid A. I really like this book. I mean, Christopher Rocchio really knew what he was doing early on with this book. It's very kind of meandering in places, but it's so beautifully written that I just forget that we're meandering around and wasting a lot of time being like homeless in this city that he's in. And I really like it. It would probably be S tier if it was like 15% shorter. It's just, it really does tend to wander. And I don't know, maybe it'll go up or down as I read the rest of the series. I want to read the rest of them hopefully next year. I might wait until like the final book gets announced, but I don't know yet. Fire in His Hands, S tier. This is the first book in the prequel series for the Dread Empire, and it should be read first. And the reason it should be read first is because in A Shadow of All Night Falling, the major characters in the prequels become minor characters, but they're so minor that you don't care about them, but they are the major characters for the other half of the series. So by reading these prequels, you get invested, and then you get to see them as like side characters in Shadow of All Night Falling, and it just makes sense that way. Trust me, read them that way. These are very good, and they're S tier in spite of the fact that like a lot of the interesting things that happen in them like weren't as interesting to me because I knew what the future was like. So anyways, I hope that makes sense. Probably doesn't. The Shining by Stephen King. This is S tier. I think that, as I said in my review of The Shining, this is Stephen King perfectly executing his way of writing books and telling stories in his autobiography / kind of guide to writing. He tells you exactly how he writes stories and exactly what he's trying to do with them. And this book is that. And it's just great. Willful Child by Steven Erikson. This is S tier because it is hilarious. Probably the funniest book I read all year. It brought me nothing but joy. I was very depressed when I started that book, and it busted my like emotional slump. It was so good. If you love Steven Erikson's humor in the Malazan series or in the Bukalain and Corbel Brooch series, then you will love this. I think that Steven Erikson is a master of satirical writing. It's just so good. I made a review about it. Check it out. Got a comment from Steven Erikson. That brought me nothing but joy. Made the channel worth it. Hey, I can quit now, I guess, or something. Annihilation is C tier. The book is weird. I don't know if I like Jeff Vandermeer. I'm going to read more, but I will say I like Jeff Vandermeer writing about books more than I like Jeff Vandermeer's books. I've read his Wonder Book, I think is what it's called, which is his workbook on writing science fiction and fantasy. He has introductions in a bunch of books that I enjoy, like Wizardry and Wild Romance from Michael Moorcock and stuff like that. It was funny. I think that even after reading Annihilation, I have read more nonfiction page count from Jeff Vandermeer than I have fiction. Anyways, Son of the Black Sword. This is A tier. It would be S tier, but there's just way too many books that are just like God level amazing that are going to be on this list that it's got to be A, but it's one of the best versions of like modern sword and sorcery. Larry Correia does a great job of writing action in fantasy. And he said it himself. I was reading something about it, that his goal with this book was to write like an action thriller, but with fantasy. And here's the thing. A lot of people will be like, oh, you heard her. There's not a lot of depth to it, blah, blah, blah. He's just writing for entertainment. There's a lot of subtext in this book. I mean, it's literally built on a caste system, and it's talking about overthrowing oppressors and the consequences of having a hyper conservative empire. And so like, there's a lot more to it than just the surface level action. I made a review about it. Also brought me joy. I found out that he shared my video on his Facebook page, but I couldn't like, hey, thank you, blah, 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 with my private Facebook account. I didn't want to dox my own channel, but for watching this, Larry Correia, I really appreciate it. You're probably not. Heirs of Babylon. This is DNF. I finished this book by Glen Cook. It was his first novel published under his name, Glen Cook, not his smut novel by Gary Stevens. I need that book. I haven't seen a copy, and I probably never will. Even Glen Cook doesn't own a copy, but I want it. Anyways, Heirs of Babylon is very bad. Maybe if I read it again, I'd like it a little more. It is a post-apocalyptic story about humanity endlessly going to war after World War II and just less and less resources every time they go to war, but they just keep doing it. And that's like in the background, but most of it is these guys get conscripted, put on this ship, to go fight this big battle that happens every generation. And along the way, people start getting killed and it becomes like a murder mystery. And so you're following the main character trying to solve who's the killer on the boat. Are they a double agent? Or is there more than one? All these good things. And then like it builds up to this big ending. And then the ending is confusing and not executed as well as I want. So maybe don't read this until you're further into your Glen Cook journey. Maybe it gets better. Convenience Store Woman. This is A tier because it's very short. It's very strange. It is about this woman who works at a convenience store. She is probably on the spectrum. She has a lot of the traits that you would expect from someone, like the routine, the inability to read the room or understand some social etiquette, masking, like this literally has part of the book about her copying the people around her in order to seem normal. It's just a very strange book, but very good. It's written by a Japanese author who I can't see the name of, and I feel terrible because this little pic is so blurry. I highly recommend it for anyone that just wants some good short fiction. It's like a novelette. Novella, they call it a novel because it's lit fic, so they can get away with writing tiny books and calling them novels. I don't know. Winter's Dream. This is readable. It's C tier, and the reason it is C tier and not higher is because, I mean, if you're not fully invested in Glen Cook, then like there's no reason to read these. Maybe I'd rank it higher on a Glen Cook devoted list. I don't know. It's just like, all right. Winter of the World, Ken Follett. This is S tier. This is the best book in the Century trilogy. I DNF'd the third book because it's terrible. Well, maybe not terrible, but just like nowhere near as good as the second one, so it might as well be terrible. Winter of the World follows up on Fall of Giants. This one takes place in the 30s and then through World War II up to like 1946 or 49, I can't remember. Like after World War II, it kind of jumps ahead a little. You're following a lot of the same characters and then their kids and stuff, and it is wonderful. I loved it from start to finish. Every character in it was magnificent. Ken Follett is a master of his craft. It is one of the best books I read all year. The problem is I read a lot of really good books. I don't even know if it would have been in the top 10, which is another reason I wanted to do this ranking, because you know, The Shining, one of Stephen King's best books ever, would not have been in my top 10. There's just too many bangers this year. Let's keep going. Shards of Honor. This is A tier. I wanted to try out the Vorkosigan saga, so I started where you're supposed to start. I really liked it. Very good. I need to read Bariyar. I have a copy up there on my shelf right next to me. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. Start of a space opera series that everyone seems to love, and I already really like it from the first book. Deadly Quicksilver Lies. This is gonna go B tier because it's just good. It's a Garrett novel. Maybe it'd be C tier compared to everything else on this list. Yeah, we'll go C. And I say that because I'm looking at the cover and I can barely remember what it was about. I think it was one of the more like okay of novels in this Garrett PI series. Speaking of detective dudes, we're gonna go with Killing Floor by Lee Child, B tier. I like Reacher. This is a pretty good book. I had a few issues with it. It is obvious that Lee Child didn't know anything about guns at the time and didn't know anything about asking anyone about how guns work. That bothered me. I feel obligated as a Texan to be hypercritical of anyone that misspeaks about firearms. And the mystery, you know, this is going to C. The mystery was like easily solved. I literally 2 pages before the big reveal of like one of the major antagonists, I was like, this better not be who I think it is. And then it was, and I'm just like, oh, okay. All right. It's still entertaining. I really like Reacher as a character. The book alone for Reacher himself is great. Now we'll go back to B. I'm going to be flip-flopping a lot here. With Mercy Toward None, I'm going to put it right next to The Fire in His Hands. This is also S tier. The prequels are some of the best stuff in the Dread Empire series. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to give credit to Only the Best in Fantasy. He said, if you like Dead House Gates from Malazan, then you're going to see a lot of things in common with these 2 books, because that whole little continent where Dead House Gates takes place, I'm going to be generous and say that it is a loving homage. After that, we got Mark Greaney, the Chaos Agent. I'm going to put this in B. It's not one of the best Gray Man novels, but it is one of the better Gray Man novels, put it that way. That's about it. I mean, it's like book like 13 or something. I don't even remember anymore. Yeah, start with the Gray Man. All of them are very good and entertaining. Samuel R. Delany, Babel 17. This book was poop from a butt. I hated this book. Everything about it I don't like. It feels like a novella that was forced into novel length. In spite of how short it is, I still didn't want to finish it. I couldn't stand the book. I don't understand the hype behind it. It uses a linguistic philosophy or science that has been debunked for a very long time. You know, even at the time, it was just like barely still considered cutting edge, and then got debunked shortly after, and it dates the book incredibly. Conquering Sword of Conan. I'm going to put this one in B tier only because I really like Red Nail, the final book in this thing, but I just didn't like the other stories. They're so good that I forgot what they are. I mean, let's put it that way. So it's going to be B tier. Like Robert E. Howard's Conan collection as a whole, if you take the half that I like, is S tier. Take the half I don't like, it's like B tier-ish. So we're going to put it there. The Long Tomorrow by Lee Brackett. This is S tier. Okay, so The Long Tomorrow is post-apocalyptic. Your boy loves post-apocalyptic, so I had to read it. This gives off a sense of loss in the same way that like The Road does from Cormac McCarthy, but without any of the baggage we now have with McCarthy, which is great. Her writing style in The Long Tomorrow feels a lot like Cormac McCarthy, except she knows how punctuation works, which is always a bonus. It's like a coming of age story with this sense of loss because it's a post-apocalyptic setting, but also this beautiful sense of discovery from this kid you're following as he grows up and comes to face like the real choices we make in life, and they're not fun choices. And anyways, I highly recommend it. It's a very short book. It's probably one of the best books on this list, one of the best post-apocalyptic books I've ever read, and it's one of my favorite subgenres. Storm Season, edited by Robert Lynn Asprin and Lynn Abbey. It's C. It's fine. It would almost go in DNF compared to everything else on this, but it's fun. It's like the fourth collection of short stories, and it's the Thieves' World anthology. It's a shared world where a bunch of authors get to play around. It was originally brainstormed by Robert Lynn Asprin and some other authors over dinner when they were arguing about how cool it would be if they could have Conan fight Elric of Melniboné. They can't because they don't take place in the same universe, but what if they did? And that's what they did, was they created Thieves' World so they could have this sword and sorcery style fantasy setting where everyone could have their own little place in the playground. Reap the East Wind. This is the fifth book in the Dread Empire series. It is good, or is it not? I can't remember. Let me look it up real quick. Yeah, it's this one. Reap the East Wind is weak because it's got two stories going on. One follows this kid of some of the people in the book and him getting like corrupted and being forced to be like this evil wizard type thing. The other half is telling a story with some of the more important characters in the books. The problem is, and I'm going to skip one real quick, is an Ill Fate Marshalling tells the same story for the first half of the book, but from a different perspective, and it's better in every way. And like Reap the East Wind just feels almost like a waste. And Ill Fate Marshalling is pretty cool because there is a major political event that happens solely because the king used sports betting to gain a huge advantage in the court against some of the people that were against him. It's really weird. It's really cool. Dread Empire is Glen Cook's like, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want kind of story. Night Winds. Night Winds gets S tier. Carl Edward Wagner is a genius. I absolutely love Kane. He is one of the coolest anti-heroes ever. This is some dark fantasy. It is not sword and sorcery, no matter how many times other people try to claim it is. Carl Edward Wagner himself said it wasn't sword and sorcery. Let's listen to the man. He was smarter than all of us. A Path to Coldness of Heart, the final book in the Dread Empire series. It is getting A tier for two reasons. One, it should probably be B tier because of the quality for most of it, but I still really enjoyed it, which is why it gets A tier. And it also gets A tier because your man Glen Cook came back and finished a book series 24 years after he abandoned it. We got closure. So that alone should rank a book higher. I mean, imagine a book series being abandoned for a quarter of a century and then the author coming back and doing a good job. Like, it does read a little different, and it's very rushed because he put 3 books worth of content into this one book because he was going to write a trilogy to end this series, and then his manuscripts were stolen and he said, nope, I'm out. So we got lucky and we got a conclusion to the series. So I'm gonna put it up there. Jack of Shadows, it's C. I mean, it's like the second worst thing that Roger Zelazny's ever written, but Roger Zelazny's a genius, so his worst work is better than most people's best work. It's not DNFable. It's fun. It's very short, so it's going to go there. I made a review about it. Check that out if you want to. The Spear Cuts Through Water. This is A tier. It's not S tier because I have way too many things that I would rank above it. But I will say that my A tier is stacked, so it's in good company. The Spear Cuts Through Water is a work of genius. I made a review about it as well. He uses first, second, and third person narration in this story, and each one of them tells a different part of this wonderful story, and he managed to weave everything together, and at some points I didn't know if he would be able to pull it off, but he did. It's a work of genius. Kugel Saga by Jack Vance is S tier. This is one of the best picaresque novels ever written. Kugel is a lovable rapscallion, and it is better than Eyes of the Overworld, because in there, Kugel's like borderline sociopathic, but in this one, it's everything Jack Vance excels at and his best character I've read so far. I love it. It's so good. I talk about it in my Picaresque defining the genre video. Petty Pewter Gods. This is one of the S tier Garrett PI novels. Now, I know a lot of people are questioning me putting a fantasy noir detective story that's just like literally written for the lulz in S tier. But here's the thing. This Garrett PI series is Glen Cook's playground. He's very experimental in it. It all follows Garrett solving mysteries in Tunfair or near Tunfair, his big city that he lives in. But when I say it's his playground, I mean he does whatever he wants here. Maybe alien technology. Who knows? This one doesn't have alien technology. This has Lovecraftian horror in a way I rarely ever see in any works of fiction. It is terrifying. This existential dread that he creates with a single scene is almost unparalleled, and it's in a goofy book about a noir detective in a fantasy world. I mean, come on. Maybe I shouldn't have included rereads on here, but this is my first tier ranking, and I haven't made a review of this book, just talked about me reading it. A Confederacy of Dunces. My favorite book of all time by John Kennedy Toole. This is the perfect picaresque. I mean, it won a Pulitzer Prize. What do you want me to say? Did it win a Pulitzer? Yeah, right? Yeah, it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1981. It is like the anti-lit fic book. It is a picaresque that follows the most annoying, like, prototype for incels, but like maybe more like the thing incels wish they were, because incels are like, anyways, I don't want to get too far into that. I'm going to make a lot of people angry. The book is perfect. The way I was selling it to people is, well, one, it's hilarious and it brings me nothing but joy. And two, it is the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia of literary fiction. It's Always Sunny is like the anti-sitcom. This is the anti-lit fic, but it also won a Pulitzer, so, you know, come at me, bro. It's so good. Ignatius is one of the greatest, most terrible characters ever created, and one of the things that brings me joy about that book is how much people hate it, especially people who go into it expecting lit fic. It would be like going into It's Always Sunny and expecting The Cosby Show or something. It's just great. The Salt reviews are almost as fun as reading the book itself. I have a problem. Use of Weapons. It's a culture book. It's S tier. Ian M. Banks was one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time. I loved it. It's not my favorite culture book, but man, is it good. It has one of the best twists ever in a novel. One of the issues I had with it is the way it tells the story, because there's like flash forwards, flashbacks. It's like weird between chapters jumping around in the timeline, which I'm not the biggest fan of in any book, but this book was so good that it gets S tier in spite of that. Gentleman of the Road by Michael Chabon. I'm going to put this in A, but it should probably be an S tier. Michael Chabon is an amazing author, and Gentleman of the Road is a fantastic picaresque. This is the year of the picaresque for me. It's when I found out it was a genre, and then I realized that a good chunk of my favorite books are picaresque. It's sword and sorcery, except you remove the magic and you make the main characters Jewish. It's wild. It's so good. Takes place in like 950 AD or something. Short too. Check it out. Illustrations in the book, also good. I think I made a review of this. I can't remember. I Have Cat, Roger Zelazny. Oh, this is worse than Jack of Shadows. I Have Cat is freaking weird. I still think it's worth reading. It has some of the best chase scenes in a book I've ever read. Like, this guy is being hunted by this beast that is telepathic and really wants him dead. And it's scary. But then you have like the main character. It's one of the last Navajo spirit hunters, and he's tripping balls and going on this weird spirit journey. It's strange. Zelazny is a genius. Maybe I'm just too dumb to understand what's going on in it. Next, we got The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is my favorite Le Guin book of all time. I've read all of Earthsea. I've read The Left Hand of Darkness, and I enjoy. I've DNF'd The Dispossessed because I don't like it. But The Lathe of Heaven, man, this is something else. I think about this book all the time. This should be like mandatory science fiction reading. People just need to read it. It's short, very good. Just go check out The Lathe of Heaven. The Land That Time Forgot. This goes in DNF. I read the first one, and there's like 2 or 3 of them in total. Edgar Rice Burroughs almost got through this whole book without being horrifically racist. Almost. It takes place at the end of like World War I. It's very anti-German, which I guess is par for the course of when this was written. They steal a German submarine and get lost on this island near Antarctica that has like a greenhouse gas effect going on. And so there's like dinosaurs and it's hot. It's a jungle, whatever. It's not very good. The Sword Bearer. This goes in DNF by Glen Cook. I don't know if Glen Cook can write a standalone. Well, at least at this point in my journey, I don't think he could. Some people like this more than others. I'm going to be talking about another one of his standalones soon that shares a lot of stuff with it. I've noticed people online, if they like one of them, they like all of them. If you don't like one of them, you aren't going to like any of them. So bear that in mind. It's about a cursed sword. I thought it'd be good. I mean, sapient swords are like one of my favorite things in fantasy, and then bad things happen, which is also good in fantasy. I just didn't like it. 61 Hours by Lee Child. This is A tier. 61 Hours is one of the later Reacher novels recommended to me by Carlos from StoryTube, and I loved it. Lee Child did a masterful job of making you feel real freaking cold because it takes place during a blizzard in like North Dakota. It sucked. I was at work listening to it at one point and I was cold and I was miserable because I was getting like a double dose of freezing my butt off. Reacher's the best. Very good mystery. Very fun action. Not much else to say. Ken Follett, The Modigliani Scandal. This is a fun book. He originally didn't write it under his name, but then when he got famous, it got republished. The Modigliani Scandal is a caper about a rare painting and like 3 different people trying to get rich or die trying over it, and it's just fun. Interesting characters. You see a lot of the things that made Ken Follett who he is today in this book. It's just a short little interesting book that takes place in the mid-70s in Europe. Pretty cool. Rialto the Marvelous. This is C because it's basically 3 or 4 short stories and only one of them is really good, and even that one gets tired because it's using the same joke again and again. Kugel is the best character to come out of the Dying Earth, but Rialto isn't bad, just nowhere near as good as any of the other stuff. The Power of the Dog, S tier. This is like grimdark real life by Don Winslow. I mean, it's about the cartels in Mexico and the war on drugs, and is one of the best crime novels I have ever read in my entire life. It would definitely be in the running for my book of the year. I did a cool chat about it with StoryTube. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description. My description might just be full of links. We'll see how that goes. But go check it out. I have been interested in reading romance for a while now, just to kind of expand my horizons. So I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and it is A tier. It is very fun. I had a great time with it. A few of my friends in the BookTube community have loved Emily Henry, so I gave her a chance. It was worth it. Very good. Beowulf is like timeless, so it's hard to rank, but if I'm comparing it to other stuff by enjoyment, I guess I'll give it A tier. I made a review about it. You should go check that out. It's good. I think the best part is Beowulf being locked inside the longhouse with the monster and then wrecking the monster so bad that the monster would rather have his arm ripped off than deal with Beowulf anymore. Pretty epic. Tower of Fear by Glen Cook goes in DNF because I DNF'd it about 60% of the way through. It has a very interesting premise and then just kind of meanders. The cast is way too big, and I just didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it. It's the most un-Glen Cook novel I had read up to that point. It reads like he was writing Robert E. Howard-ish. Not even Robert E. Howard-ish, more like Fritz Leiber-ish, which makes sense because he lived with Fritz Leiber. So maybe that's why I had issues with it, because it just doesn't feel like Glen Cook. The thing that makes Glen Cook who he is his style. So anytime he drifts away from it, the books are just lacking. Fated Steel Heat is probably C tier because it feels forgettable. I would have to look it up. I think it was one of the ones that I was like less impressed with. Grace of Kings, this is A tier. It's not quite S tier. I really liked it. That's the thing, is like, look at my A tier. They're really good books. But yeah, it's a epic fantasy where you replace magic with engineering. It's super freaking cool. Really like it. Heart of Darkness is C. People are going to assume I'm a moron because I put this in C, but like Apocalypse Now is a better telling of Heart of Darkness, even though they both take about the same amount of time to read / watch. I just really wasn't the biggest fan of it. I do give Joseph Conrad credit though. English was not his first language, and he ended up being one of the greatest writers in the English language, so props to him. King Solomon's Mines is C tier. It's very fun, but it just doesn't hold up compared to this other stuff. I recommend it to anyone that wants to see where Tolkien got his style from. This was one of his favorite books when he was growing up. H. Rider Haggard created the pulp genre basically with his writing, so it's definitely worth reading. It's just 140 years old or whatever, and I think it suffers the same way the movie Alien does, where a lot of the tropes that you see in modern writing are in this book, so it just feels tired, but at the time it was cutting edge. After that, we got John the Balladeer, which is A tier, but 2 of the stories in it are S tier. One of them is a allegory for Christianity, and even a godless heathen like myself was moved by it. It was one of the most beautiful things I've read this year. And the other story, I think it's called Like a Mountain. It is probably in the top 5 greatest short stories I have read in my entire life, and I only read the best of the best. Not saying like I'm good at picking them. I'm just really good at finding people to recommend to me the best short fiction ever written. And wow. So it belongs in A tier because you get to follow John the Balladeer. It's a wonderful story. He knows a little about a lot, and he's real good at playing guitar, and he helps solve supernatural, horrific things in Appalachia in the 1950s. He's a Korean War vet, too, and he's a early in the Korean War vet, which means he really saw some stuff and the man can fight. I don't think you survive the first year of the Korean War without knowing how to fight. There's not a lot of background on him, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was part of the breakout at Chosin Reservoir. Destry Rides Again. This is a very fun Western, very old Western too. I really like it. It is one of those things that people should read if they want like a historical context for a lot of the tropes you get in the modern Western. It feels of its time in like a good way. Like when you watch really old movies, sometimes you're like, okay, it's in black and white, cool. And they're using that stupid mid-Atlantic accent. But other times you're like, wow, this is cinema. This is legit. Well, that's kind of where this falls. Red Rising. This goes to S tier. Okay. I love this from basically the first chapter. It's so fast paced. It's just so fun and so over the top and aware that it's over the top. The same goes for the other books that I will talk about in a second. Let's get Last Stand at Papago Wells out of the way. This story is fine. Like, it doesn't really change the world or anything. Super short Lou L'Amour book. I read it for June on the Range. It's okay. But let's get back to what really matters. Golden Sun, also S tier. Morning Star, also S tier. Holy crap. Pierce Brown is one of my new favorite science fiction writers. They're so good. Very rarely do I get into a book that consumes my being. It is all I cared about when I was reading it. It was all I wanted to do. I listened to them, and the narrator is great. And when it came to Morning Star, I listened to it for 10 hours straight while driving home from a family road trip. I drove for 16 hours straight that day. And as soon as I was starting to feel a little tired, put on Morning Star. I ain't tired anymore. I was awake and I was locked in. It's so good. I love that series. It's phenomenal. I can't wait to read the rest of them. I kind of want to wait for the last book though. Gotta zoom out a little. We're losing screen space, getting a little stacked. I read Hondo. It's DNFable. It's like a adaptation of a screenplay back into a book from Louis L'Amour or whatever. I don't like it. Dark War by Glen Cook, also DNFable. I read the first 1.5 of them. It's a trilogy. I condensed it because I DNF'd part of it. And also, I didn't care enough to find all 3 books and put them on here. I didn't like it. It's science fantasy. Maybe some other people would like it more. It doesn't feel like Glen Cook. It feels like he was writing as if he was someone else. Dashiell Hammett, Thin Man. It's A tier. It's very fun. I think it is justified being one of the like classics of the noir detective tale. Man, the main character drinks way too much booze. The man is an alcoholic. His wife is real cool though. I like her. She's smart. Happy Place. Happy Place is also A tier. It was a lot of fun. Maybe I just don't know enough about romance to be critical of it, but I really enjoyed both Emily Henry books. Happy Place has some flaws. The more I think about it, the more I kind of want to move it to B tier. Yeah, let's move it to B tier. Terminal Boredom is B because it is a short story collection, and the short story collections are never perfect. There's always some stories that are stinkers and some that aren't. Izumi Suzuki was an amazing writer who was completely unknown until after she took her own life, and man, she should get more recognition for just writing some of the best science fiction-ish. It's like kind of Black Mirror style science fiction in some ways. It's real good. It's very short too. I used it to like kind of cleanse my palate between books. A lot of these really short books, that's what they're there for, was kind of a way to interrupt between things so I didn't get burnt out or too locked in on a specific genre, stuff like that. Angry Lead Skies. This is an A tier Glen Cook, like Garrett novel, because it is so different than the other ones. It's such a weird premise. I don't want to get into it at all because it's super late in the series too. This is when I realized that Glen Cook does whatever he wants in the Garrett series. And 1, the editors don't tell him no. And 2, there's no reason to because it's just fun. A Song for Arbonne. Man, this is S tier. I'm going to give away a little thing right now. I don't think Guy Gabriel Kay can write a bad book. I don't think he can write below S tier. I guess I'll find out when I read the Fionavar tapestry that everyone says is his worst work, but you know, Song for Arbonne is perfect. I made a review about it too. Pop 1280 also made a review about this. This book is incredibly dark and incredibly messed up. Jim Thompson is one hell of a writer. I don't know if I want to read any more of his works because a few of my Discord book buddies did and were like, oh, this is hard to get through. This is hurting me and I don't want that. I love Pop 1280. Oh, Lonesome Dove. Look at that. This was all during like my end of June, beginning of July. Like, let's get into some more Westerns. Lonesome Dove, probably the greatest Western ever written. The book is so good, it made me dislike my previous favorite Western, which was Blood Meridian. Both of them are like anti-Westerns, but Lonesome Dove does a lot of what Blood Meridian does, except better. It shows the brutality of the West, but the writing is better. The characters are better. It doesn't have any of the weird Cormac McCarthy baggage, which it's like a IPA of literature where you either like it or you don't. And Lonesome Dove is like the tastier IPA, I guess. The one that's a little more citrus and not pine nuts, because the pine nut IPAs are disgusting. Anyways, I'm rambling. Lonesome Dove, real good. Probably in the top 3 for my book of the year. I don't know. It's going to be an all-time banger for me forever. Gus is the GOAT. Wild cards, Aces Abroad, C tier. It's almost DNF. I DNF'd one of the stories because the character is so stupid and the narrator was terrible for that character, but I thought that it might be the audiobook that was ruining my enjoyment. So I went to paper and started reading it and I was like, no, this story just really sucks. One of the stories in it's so bad it drags it all the way down to here. All the stuff George R. R. Martin wrote in this, which are like the interludes, yet again, it's George R. R. Martin. He's a genius. It's very good. The Postman. The Postman is getting A tier because I love that book. It is nothing like the movie. The only thing they have in common is the guy pretends to be a postman. After that, this book goes off in some strange directions. Post-apocalyptic. I love it. Did I make a review? I can't remember. Probably not. I should have. If you want to get into David Brin, check out The Postman. It's short. It's very fun. Next, we have The Martian Chronicles. I'm putting that in DNF. Some of the short stories were good. Others, I don't know why they exist. There was one in there that is like S tier short story, and then there's like 3 in a row that made me want to quit the book. I finished the book. I almost regret finishing the book. It felt like a waste of time in some places. I know that a lot of people love Ray Bradbury's short fiction. Maybe it's me. Maybe I will appreciate some of his other short fiction collections better. I don't know. Frankenstein is B tier. Sorry, all of you Frankenstein enjoyers out there. I read the 1818 text and it's good. It's just not what I like, which is why it gets bumped down to, a place that still has books I really enjoy. So these next 2 are going to be a little confusing, but I'm going to put them up at the same time. They're S tier. We have Shadowline, book 1 in the Starfishers trilogy, and then I accidentally picked Shadowline again for Starfishers, which is book 2 in the Starfishers trilogy, and I'm going to go ahead and throw up Star's End and A Passage at Arms. I made a video about this. Glen Cook's science fiction, at least when it comes to these 4 books, is as good as his best stuff in the Black Company. This is some of the best science fiction I've read in the last decade. The Starfishers trilogy starts as like military science fiction with Shadowline, and then Starfishers is like a spy novel that has like these really interesting things going on, and then Star's End is like the culmination of that story, and it is magnificent. And then Passage at Arms is the best standalone Glen Cook's ever written. Takes place in the same universe. It takes place like before the trilogy, so you can read it before or after. It does not matter. It is beautiful. I think that Passage at Arms is the other book I would recommend to anyone new to Glen Cook. The Black Company and Passage at Arms. Those 2 books, pick one. If you like science fiction more, take Passage at Arms. Like fantasy more, Black Company. They're S tier. They're so good. I cannot get over how good Glen Cook is as a science fiction writer. I Am Legend, Richard Matheson. This is C tier. It's fine. I don't want to read it ever again. I appreciate the way vampires work in it, even though they basically work like modern zombies, which makes sense because George A. Romero was inspired by I Am Legend to create zombies the way the vampires are written in I Am Legend. Martians Go Home. I had a lot of fun with this book. I probably rated it higher than I should have, but it's going in C tier. Frederick Brown's a really good writer. This book is fun, but it's not as good as everything else on the list. The Deep Blue Goodbye, S tier, because Travis McGee is my new favorite detective of all time, even though he's not a cop or anything like that. Man's real good at solving mysteries, and holy crap, can John D. McDonald write. Bridger from the Library Ladder told me I should check these out, and wow, am I glad I did. I love the Travis McGee series. You about to see a lot of them in S tier and A tier, because none of them out of the 11 I have read so far are bad. It's just amazing. The man can't miss. Liar's Blade, which is a Pathfinder Tales novel by Tim Pratt, is C tier. It's fun. If you like Pathfinder, you'll like it. If you don't like Pathfinder, it'd be in your DNF pile. There's nothing going for it beyond just being competently written and taking place in the Pathfinder universe. Nightmare in Pink, my favorite Travis McGee novel. It has some of the most terrifying psychological thriller moments I have ever read in a book. I was so scared I had to remind myself that there are sequels. It's very intense. It has like one of my legit phobias in it. Purple Place for Dying. This is A tier. This Travis McGee novel gives off like the vibes of No Country for Old Men, but it's a mystery. And, it does take place around the same location, like geographically, as No Country for Old Men in like Southwest Texas. It's very good, but just not as good as the other 2. I read all 3 of them in a single weekend, by the way. The Executioner, Don Pendleton. This is DNF. I finished it, but no one should read it. It's just not very good. I will give anyone 10 other books to read in the same vein of novel before you should even think about reading The Executioner. Guards by Terry Pratchett. It's Discworld, and Pratchett's a genius, and this is one of the best books in the series. I don't know what else to say. Any of you watching this are probably already Pratchett enjoyers, and if not, go read Guards. So good. The Chrysalids, John Wyndham. This is A tier. John Wyndham is a very good science fiction writer. This is a post-apocalyptic story that takes place in Eastern Canada, following a fundamentalist group that has survived the apocalypse, and their obsession with purity is unsettling, and the main character comes of age in this society and figures out they have abilities that would make them impure in this world they grew up in. And it goes from there. One hell of a dark ending. Holy crap. Makes you think, ooh, who's the bad guys? Digger, Smoked Out. This is B tier. This book did me dirty. I made a video about it. Warren Murphy had no right to trick me with this book that should have been terrible and ends up being one of the best mysteries I've ever read. It was such a fun mystery to solve. Digger is an insurance investigator, and he is investigating the life insurance policy on this woman who was married to like the doctor of the stars in the Hollywood Hills. She drove off a cliff and died, and he's trying to figure out why it happened and whether or not it was murder. And it's just real weird because the main character is a jerk and a bit of a douche in a lot of places. But then again, the mystery is just so good. I was just compelled to get through that story. The Death and Life of Superman. I want to put it in S tier because of how much it means to me, but it's going to go in A tier because I forgot how terrible and stupid the last 20% of that book is. I love the whole Superman fighting Doomsday and dying. Sorry for the spoiler, but you know, it's literally in the title. And I love just thinking about how you pick up the pieces after a hero like that is gone. Like you watch a demigod die on live television and you see these people put on the cape and do their best. Most people probably wouldn't like it. It is competently written so you can get through it without being miserable, but you know, you've been warned. Gateway by Frederick Pohl. This goes in C. Like it's a good science fiction novel. It's just not as good as anything above it. So do with that as you will. I'm not going to elaborate. I'm going to move myself so that it's easier to see some of these books. We'll just go to the top. There we go. Death of a Citizen. So Donald Hamilton can sure as heck write about an assassin. This takes place in the 1950s. A former World War II, like precursor to the CIA assassin, is forced to go back to his old ways to save his family. And it's really good. Takes place in New Mexico, like Santa Fe area. I love the whole vibe we get of Santa Fe and authors like Zelazny was in Santa Fe, George R. R. Martin's in Santa Fe. I don't know if Donald Hamilton was in Santa Fe, but his character, who was an author, is in Santa Fe. Pretty cool. Another one that Bridger from the Library Ladder recommended to me. He's doing me dirty, man. That's 2 series in a row that have like 20 books in them that I feel compelled to read. I can't wait to get back to the Donald Hamilton series. It's better than like most of the stuff in the same vein that's been published in the last 70 years after it came out. Just very good. The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. It's S tier. It is like a perfectly paced novel and some of the best science fiction I read all year. I mean, I don't know what to really say about it. There's just a lot going on in the book. I think that it's one of the best explorations of what an alien culture would be like in a novel. Conan, The Road of Kings by Carl Edward Wagner. The best Conan pastiche I've ever read, but that really doesn't say much because Conan pastiches are terrible, but this one was by Carl Edward Wagner, so it was good enough, I guess is the way to put it. I'm going to move this over a little. Hopefully this doesn't screw anything up so it's easier to see what's going on. Next we've got, oh look, Guy Gavriel K. Put that right in S tier. I'll go ahead and put the other one in there too. The Sarantine Mosaic, consisting of Sailing to Sarantium and Lord of Emperors. It's magnificent. It would probably be my book of the year as a single book. It has everything I want. Fantasy, Byzantine Empire, Guy Gavriel K's beautiful writing and characters. I made a video about it. Go check it out. The Quick Red Fox. It's good, but it's just not as good as the other ones. It is about a Hollywood starlet who hires McGee to find some photographs of her that have been used to blackmail her. She wants the originals so that she doesn't have her image ruined because of the weird stuff that she's been doing and been into. Conan the Rebel by Poul Anderson. DNF'd it. It was very bad. I had high hopes for it because it was Poul Anderson writing Conan, but man, I did not like it at all. The only good thing about it is it has Belit's origin story. But other than that, she's only in it for like a hot minute. And then the rest of it is him, like, I don't know, leading a rebellion in the most boring way possible. Guy Gabriel K, The Lions of Al-Rassan. Hey, look, another S tier. This is the best Guy Gabriel K book I've read so far. It is perfect. Every character in it is perfect. The pacing is perfect. The atmosphere is perfect. The ending is magnificent. It has such a cool way of telling this very epic fight in a way that I've never seen in another book. And then, in spite of what other people say, I love the epilogue. It brought me nothing but joy and closure, which I needed. Heroes Die by Matthew Woodring Stover. It's S tier. This book is bad crap insane. Balls to the wall, so much action, so much violence. I loved every second with it. Man, it is just the weirdest blend of science fiction and fantasy and hyper violence that is like a critique of reality television, Twitch streaming culture, violence in media. It's so good. There's so much going on with it, and a lot of people just don't see it because they don't get past the violent, action-y facade. There are some issues with it, issues that don't bother me as much as they bother other people, but I guess I'll put that out there. City by Clifford Simic. S tier, because man, it's about doggies talking about these weird things from the mythological age called human, and they don't know anything about them, but their robot helpers sure do. Very weird. It's very good. It holds up really well. The fact that Simic was writing this stuff when Asimov was writing makes me feel like Asimov was a hack, because Simic does all the cool stuff that Asimov does, except better, and he's a better writer in every way. So I'll just leave that out there. Isaac Asimov, a hack. You heard it from me. Hey, look, A Deadly Shade of Gold by John D. MacDonald. This one is S tier. At the time when I finished it, I was like, I don't know if it's one of the better ones, but the more I think about it, the more I like it, and it's a double dose of McGee. It is twice as long as the other Travis McGee novels, with twice as many characters, for good or for bad. It is paced a little odd because he essentially tells two different stories in it, but I really like it. And I think that this book was the catalyst for some of the issues that Travis McGee is struggling through later in the series, which I guess I'll talk about when I get to the last McGee book on here, 6 books later in the series. Whispering Nickel Idols. This book was probably one of the worst Garrett PI books. I'm going to put it in C tier. I just didn't like it. The problem is it sets up a lot of stuff that takes place later on in the series. There's like a major character that's in this, and it's her origin. So that's annoying. The Space Merchants by Frederick Pohl and C.M. Kornbluth. A tier. Probably one of the better books of the 1950s. Speaking of Asimov being a hack, these two guys wrote a story that's better than just about anything Asimov did in that decade. I don't know why I'm bullying Asimov. I like his books. The Space Merchants is a satire of consumerism and advertising and companies controlling government, which would never happen. It's literally impossible. So, kind of ruins my immersion. Never, ever would corporations control governments, and our entire culture would be built around advertising and media. So I just don't believe it's not believable. All right. You ready to have your soul crushed? I wasn't when I read Bright Orange for the Shroud. Initially, I was going to read this with my boys at the Elusive Exclusive Book Society because I got to pick the book we were going to read, and then I read it early and I thought, oh no, their podcast is about having fun, and this book was not fun. This book was about as fun as season 1 of True Detective, in that it was traumatic and broke my heart. The intensity levels in this McGee novel are ramped to 11, and I felt sick in some of the chapters. Also, one of the best books in the series. So take that as you will. In a Lonely Place by Carl Edward Wagner is A tier. This is a collection of his horror fiction, and Carl Edward Wagner is a genius. I should move Night Winds down, now that I think about it, to A tier, because both of these are on par with one another. In a Lonely Place has a story called Sticks, which the creators of Blair Witch Project claim wasn't an inspiration, but weirdly enough, the woods are full of weird stick figures, and then there's a freaking monster thing in a basement at the end that consumes the POV character. So, man, wow, that's the same story. Anyways, I highly recommend In a Lonely Place. I adore that book. Carl Edward Wagner is one of the greatest of all time when it comes to horror fiction. Darker Than Amber. This is one of the more forgetful Travis McGee novels. I'm going to put that in C tier. So I guess I lied to you when I said that none of them would be below B. This is the most forgetful of the ones I've read so far. It's just like your basic McGee novel, but like one of the characters in it was really annoying. And if you don't like Meyer, you won't like this book at all. Tyranny of the Night by Glen Cook. I DNF'd this, and I DNF'd the series that it takes place in, which is the Instrumentalities of the Night. I don't like it. I don't like the way it's written. I like the premise. It takes place in like the 1300s in our world, except the serial numbers are shaved off and names are changed, kind of like the way Guy Gavriel Kay writes all his stories. The problem being, I don't like the story. The main character is just okay, but there's like nothing going for it that invests me in the story. And I have looked around and seen comments from other people, and the thing is you either like The Tyranny of the Night or you like Dread Empire. It's never both. Only the Best in Fantasy had a video recently where someone made a comment along those lines and he agreed with him about it. And well, basically stated what I said. So anyways, let's go on. So Cruel Zinc Melodies is going to go C tier. It's one of the more forgetful Garrett novels, to the point that I had to edit out a chunk just now where I thought it was a different Garrett novel because it's just not very good. It introduces a character that matters in the next two books, and I absolutely adore that character, but in this one, they're barely in it, and the mystery is just kind of, I don't know. It feels like it was slapped together. I didn't like it at all, but it's still like not DNFable because it was fun. The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is going in C. I didn't really care for it. I think the problem with it is I'm already wallowing in absurdism and atheism in a way that this book just is like not cutting edge. When it was written, I bet it was like phenomenal. But the problem is it's like, hey, this character doesn't think God's real, and this character doesn't really care about anything. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to real life, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. So maybe it's just like its age is showing, because a lot of the things in it are just like how millennials feel today. It's not bad, and like everything Albert Camus is about, I like the idea of, even the fact that he was an Algerian French journalist. It's just cool. I love his whole background. I love his philosophy. I just didn't really care for the book that much. Maybe I'm just too dumb. I've said that before, but it might be true. Cycle of the Werewolf is gonna go B tier. It's a very good Stephen King book. It's not even in like my top 5 Stephen King books, and I've only read like 6 or 7, I think. But anyways, it's fun. Illustrations are amazing. It's a good story about a werewolf killing a bunch of people in a small New England town. Shocker. Stephen King does what he does best and creates amazing characters in Maine. A Night in the Lonesome October, A tier. Zelazny's just amazing. And this book is very fun. It is from the POV of a doggy, and you follow a bunch of Victorian era characters. Like, I don't want to spoil them. It's really fun. Got some Lovecraftian horror elements. Pale Grave for Guilt by John D. MacDonald. Another McGee novel. I'm going to put this one in the C tier as well. It's good, but it's not going to be liked by a lot of people that read McGee because it is all white collar crime. It's nice to have like a change of pace, and I liked it, but I don't think it holds up compared to these other books. I can't believe I put Digger above it, but Digger's a lot more fun. One Fearful Yellow Eye, A tier. Another Travis McGee novel. You might have noticed I like these. I read 3 of them in a row twice. This one is a nice change of pace. It takes place in Chicago in the wintertime, and he is trying to solve a mystery for a friend who was dying, and I really like it. And it has this very strange ending. It goes places I didn't expect, which after reading, 9 or 10 of these books, you would think that I'd be able to kind of suss out where John D. MacDonald was going with some of these mysteries. Nope, he fooled me again in the best way possible. And it opens up Travis McGee's little world to like the greater world at the time of the late 60s. You see some stuff in here that are relevant to people at the time. It's really cool. I mean, I'm being super vague because I don't want to spoil it. This scene comes out of nowhere. I'm just like, whoa, holy cow. Hey, look, another John D. MacDonald book. This is B tier. It is The Girl in the Plain Brown Wrapper, I think is what it's called. It's just okay. I don't think it's as bad as like Darker Than Amber or Pale Grey for Good. Yeah, it is. Okay, this is going to C tier. It's all right. It's not that it's bad, because there's not a bad McGee novel so far. It's just that it's not as good as the absolute bangers or any of the amazing stuff above it. I'm going to move the Quick Red Fox down. It should be in C tier. Or should I move them all to B? You know what? I'm moving them all to B. I changed my mind. These McGee novels are better than everything that's in C tier. So what do I know? Changing my mind as we're doing this. Here we go. I'm going to throw all 5 of these up at once. I read all 5 of them in 2 weeks. The first 5 in Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber. 9 Princes in Amber, A tier. Guns of Avalon, S tier. Sign of the Unicorn, A tier. The Hand of Oberon, S tier. Courts of Chaos, A tier. Series as a whole, S tier. Roger Zelazny was a genius. I love everything about these books. Each one is different in its own way. Nine Princes in Amber is like portal fantasy. Guns of Avalon is some over-the-top demon slaying sword and sorcery. Sign of the Unicorn is interfamilial conflict / trying to solve an almost murder mystery. The Hand of Oberon is a broadening of the things that happen in Sign of the Unicorn with some more really weird interfamilial stuff, and then a crazy twist I had no idea was going to happen. And then the Courts of Chaos finishes what the other 4 books started and ties things up in a very good way, and I'm looking forward to the second half of the series, even though a lot of people say it's not as good. I feel like I've said that a million times in the last month because I don't want to shut up about the Amber series. I love it. Condominium, John D. MacDonald. This is B tier. This is his great American novel. I talked about it in my wrap-up recently. It takes place in the late 70s in Florida. It covers the sketchy politicians and the sketchy builders and the sketchy real estate agents and just the overall grift that was happening in the Florida real estate business at that time. And man, I'm pretty sure all that stuff's gone in Florida. There's no sketchy builders or sketchy real estate agents or weaselly politicians. You know, that stuff just doesn't happen anymore. When John D. MacDonald wrote that book, I bet he was angry because he'd been living in Florida for like 20 years at that point, watching all this stuff happen, all these things change. I don't think he was mad that there were more people in Florida. I think he was mad that there were so many people in Florida taking advantage of the people that wanted to come there. It's good. Characters are great. The cast is ginormous, but somehow he makes it work. The McGee series as a whole is better. Every McGee book is better than Condominium, but if mystery solving amazing dude isn't your thing, maybe check out Condominium as your John D. MacDonald book of choice. It's way different than everything else he ever wrote, but still very good. So I confused Cruel's Ink Melodies for Gilded Latin Bones, and I had to edit out that section, but A tier, Gilded Latin Bones, one of the better Garrett books in the entire series. It has a character I absolutely adore that was introduced in the previous book, and it has a very good mystery. The coolest thing about this is it is so different than every other Garrett PI book. It takes place in 2 locations, a bedroom above a brothel, and at Garrett's house, Garrett is doing what his associate normally does, which is sending people out and they bring him info and he solves the mystery that way instead of like pounding the pavement like the gumshoe that he is. This book is 80% dialogue and somehow he makes it work. It was very refreshing to read book 13 in a series and it be so different and so well done. A Matter of Time. I'm going to give it B tier because it is the best standalone that isn't Passage at Arms from Glen Cook. It's very trippy. It's got time travel. The premise is a detective in like 1976 or 78 or whatever finds a dead body in an alleyway in St. Louis in the middle of winter. The body is still warm, but all the other signs show that they died in 1922. Just real strange book, but very good. Going a little fast now because my throat hurts and this is running long. Tanith Lee, she's going in B tier because Knight's Master is a very interesting book. Tanith Lee is an astounding writer. I cannot believe her level of talent, but 2/3 of this book, because it's basically like 3 short stories, are just okay. The middle story is phenomenal. The stories revolve around the demon king of the night. Can't remember his name. And so in the first one, he finds a child and basically grooms it, which is problematic, but he is a demon and he views humans as property. So I don't know how interspecial relationships would work because these are 2 sapient entities that share nothing in common, not even like the plane of existence upon which they were created. I'm not trying to justify it, just kind of thinking about it because that's what Tanith Lee does. She puts thoughts in your head and makes you confront them and try to figure things out. The second story is about the Demon King putting out some coveted items and watching humanity try to destroy itself to get a hold of them because he wanted to be entertained. Very weird. Very good book overall. Might move up in my ratings if I read it again. If we went on writing alone, just her ability with the written word, it would be S tier. I just really didn't like 2 of the 3 stories in it. Next, we're going to bang them out all again real quick. I'm going to go Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. That is A tier. King of Thorns, S tier. Emperor of Thorns, A tier. This trilogy is astounding. I decided to read it because I wanted to read more modern stuff that people consider grimdark, and this ticks all the boxes. I really liked it. I think King of Thorns is a masterpiece. It does a lot of the things from Prince of Thorns better. Every single thing is just better. Emperor of Thorns, while interesting, just wasn't as fulfilling as King of Thorns. I don't know why, Maybe I have to think about it more. I was talking to Carlos from StoryTube about it, and it might just be a matter of it doesn't hit for me the same way it does for other people, or maybe I'm just not seeing it. I don't know, but it's still A tier. I mean, what do you want from me? The Texas-Israeli War, 1999, by Jake Saunders and Harold Waldrop. I read this for the Elusive Exclusive Book Club, and it was fun, but it's not as good as anything on this list. I don't know what else to say. Like, it's an alternate future history thing. It was written in the late 70s. Great Britain decided to nuke Ireland, South Africa, and China for reasons. And then Israel was one of the few places that didn't lose a significant amount of its population. And so rather than starve, a lot of them went out and became mercenaries. And this follows two tank commanding mercenaries as they try to rescue the president of the United States from the Texas secessionists. Yep, it's as insane as it sounds. Wind and Truth, S tier. Wow, is it good. The prologue and day one are bad, but everything else makes up for it. I absolutely love this book. It shines a light on the characters I care about most. It made the characters I care about least tolerable to good. He knocked it out of the park. He did what he wanted to do with it, which was, just slap it down on the table and tell you what the next 15 years of the Cosmere are going to be like. Wind and Truth is just astounding. I know these are getting hard to read, but we're almost done. The Long Lavender Look is S tier. This is one of the best Travis McGee books in the series. I'm very close to thinking it's better than Nightmare in Pink and Bright Orange for the Shroud. It is perfect Travis McGee. Like everything you want in one of his stories. Great mystery, great side characters, and then somehow it just got better. The whole time I was reading it, I was like, this is like 4 stars, and then there's this scene with one of the kind of antagonists in the book, and it's just beautifully written. I was really starting to feel something for this book. And then the ending. Holy crap, the ending. One of the things I talk about with the Travis McGee series is every single book has like this healing, this closure at the end. Even if the mystery doesn't get solved in the way you expected, you have McGee being this knight in shining armor. He's very jaded, very cynical, but also he cares. He goes out of his way to help these people and to help these victims heal. And the end of this book is kind of him coming to terms with the fact that every time he does this, a piece of him is taken away and it's not getting better. And it broke my heart. And wow, yeah, it's one of the best books in the series. I love it so much. I just finished it. I want to read it again. The Sunlit Man, S tier. I made a video about Wind and Truth and the Sunlit Man. The Sunlit Man is everything I love about Brandon Sanderson's writing. Amazing action, very cool main character, very cool world building. I mean, it's Brandon Sanderson, but what it taught me was what I'm going to be getting for the next 10 or 15 years out of the Cosmere. You have fantasy tech dealing with science fiction tech in the Cosmere, and they work together, and science fiction tech is not always better. Sometimes you gotta have a shard blade, and ain't nobody messing with a dude with a shard blade. I don't care if you got laser guns, I'll sort that out right about the time the smoke comes out of your eyeballs. So it's great. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. This last one I'm not quite done with, but it's gonna count for this because it's part of the Glen Cook journey. Wicked Bronze Ambition, I'm gonna put in B tier for now. Maybe I'll come back and change that or talk about it at a later date. It's starting off fine. I almost wanted to quit reading it because of something that happened in it, but that's a me problem and not a Glen Cook problem, because when Glen Cook writes a book, shit happens. He wrote an essay about writing fantasy in Writing Fantasy Heroes, and he says shit happens. If a character falls off their horse and dies, but they were supposed to be part of the story later on, you adapt, you change. It's just like real life, which is one of the ways his books feel grounded. And shit happened in this book and I don't like it, but I got to deal with it because that's the way the world works. Things happen and you adapt. So this is ridiculously large, 125 books. And I got a lot of S and A tier, which makes sense because I read some bangers. I will try to make a image of this so that it's easier to go through. But what I'll do right now is I'm going to zoom in and we're just going to scroll by slowly. So anyone that wants to pause this can do so. So let's go. Let's embiggen this. And here we go. Here is my list or tier ranking or whatever you want to call these things. I'm misspeaking because my brain is turned to mush. I hope you enjoyed this video. My throat is hurting. I love talking about books. I love ranking books. This was very fun. I will probably do this from now on when I talk about books at the end of the year. Let me know in the comments if you still want me to do a top 10 of the year. You've seen everything I liked. I basically take my 10 favorites out of S tier, and any series I would condense into a single option I don't think that gives them an advantage because some books are weaker than others. So let me know if you still want a top 10. I'll probably try and make that happen. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books. Let me know what you think of my ranking. My last ranking riled some people up. It was good though. It's nice to have a conversation in the comments and hear people's thoughts on why I was wrong. This year was outstanding. Cannot believe I read as much as I did. I've had such a great time this year. Reading has always been that one hobby of mine that never goes away. I would take long breaks from being obsessed with books, but I'd still read, like 10 or 20 books a year. And then this year, I just blew it out of the water in a way I did not expect. I guess that's it. Thanks for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.